doing this investigation now for 5 weeks. We haven't been sitting here doing nothing. We've been putting in a lot of hours.
This was a very brutal killing. The victim was pregnant. This was angry, and this was vicious.
Your husband is in jail for murder, and you're drug into that mess.
When you've got such an overkill on somebody, it suggests that it's personal.
Were you 100% involved in this? Were you standing there when she was killed?
We've confronted her with some of the evidence, tried to get her to tell us more of what she knew, and she just accused us of making that up and lying about that information.
I want to see her dead body. I want to see exactly how
She's been buried. She's been laid to rest.
Well, I want to see a picture. You have this evidence. What evidence?
Scientific evidence. And when I say that, that means DNA. You can't mess with DNA. You can't change it. You can't take it away.
We knew it all to be lies.
He did something horrible, and you know it.
You're trying to rattle my bones.
Okay.
She had no problem participating in the planning of this murder. In fact, she enjoyed it.
Love can make people do all sorts of crazy things. People kill for love.
November 13th, 2015, Minot, North Dakota. It's just after 7 a.m. when a local resident dials 911 in a panic.
911, what is the address of your emergency? I just got home, my back door is kicked in, and my girl ain't answering the phone.
The Minot Police Department received a 911 call from Christopher Jackson. He was reporting that his fiancée, Angela Wilder, was not responding to his calls. He had arrived home from work and found that their back door had been kicked open.
He called into the house for his fiancée and his 2-year-old son, and he has not received any response.
Yeah, I'm about to go in.
Okay, why don't you just wait for officers? I'll get them over there.
All right, thank you.
Minot officers arrive within minutes and are met by 32-year-old Christopher Jackson.
He became somewhat disorderly because he wanted to go in and see what was going on, and they had to physically restrain him from doing that. First responders went inside to check the residence, to clear the residence.
It's clean, it's orderly, it's tastefully decorated, and they notice all these pictures on the walls in the living room of Angela and her kids, and they think this house was cozy, this house had a family. And so then they walk down the hallway, and one of the officers calls her name multiple times, and she does not respond whatsoever, and so they know that this situation is dire.
They found the 19-month-old baby boy awake in his crib, and then across from his bedroom, they found Wilder's and Jackson's bedroom locked. First responders took the baby out to Mr. Jackson and asked for permission to force entry into that bedroom. Mr. Jackson did give them permission to do that.
2 other officers kicked down the door. There was just barely any light, and so it was very dark. So they flipped on the light. They noticed that there were bloodstains on the sheets, but there was nobody in the bed. They walked even further into the room, and that's when they discovered Angela's body laying on the ground in a pool of blood.
There were several visible stab wounds. They were all up around her neck and her upper chest area. It was very obvious that Angela Wilder was targeted in this murder.
It was school time. And with the school being right across the street, I'm ushering the kids across the street to school. And as I'm walking back, they're putting police tape up. I looked at the officer and I pointed at the house and I said, "What is going on? I have friends in there." And that's when he just said, there's nothing I can say. I had no idea what was going on. I just knew that it wasn't okay. Angela, she was very sweet. I just remember being very concerned.
Originally from California, Angela Small had spent the majority of her young life in Phoenix City, Alabama.
I grew up in the same church as Angela. She was really sweet, like timid around people she didn't know, but very extroverted around people that she was familiar with. And so I think she thrived around people that she knew and loved.
Angela was very heavily involved in her church. She attended all of the group activities, all the youth activities. She completed her seminary work. She was very devout to the Mormon faith.
After high school, Angela moved 250 miles away to attend the University of South Alabama on a full Army scholarship. But her path dramatically shifted during her first semester.
She meets somebody, and they begin dating. But then all of a sudden, Angela finds out that she's pregnant. She decided she was going to keep the baby. The Army really wanted scholars to focus on their studies, and so she did have to drop out.
The relationship with her child's father was short-lived. So Angela moved back home to Phoenix City and reconnected with her church.
A man named Richie Wilder was attending that church as well, and he was a growing leader. She really liked him. He had a job, he had goals for his future. Angela and Richie start dating.
Richie was very charismatic, outgoing, very cute and charming, and he fell head over heels in love with her daughter, and he was around them all the time. They got married in January of 2009. They were really excited to see what their future was going to hold, and Richie was really excited to be able to adopt Angela's daughter.
Shortly after getting married, Richie joined the Air Force.
Angela was a little reserved about him going into the military, but they kind of wanted some financial stability. And so that was Richie's way of providing for Angela and her daughter.
They are assigned to the Minot Air Force Base in North Dakota. And they find out very quickly afterwards that Angela is pregnant with their second child.
After the birth of their son, however, Angela and Richie began to disagree about how best to raise their children.
They had kind of isolated themselves up there in the north, and they're experiencing what married life really feels like, and it's hard for them.
And pretty soon things kind of became rocky. And the marriage really probably wasn't meant to be to begin with.
The couple decided to divorce in the spring of 2012 and concentrated on co-parenting.
The custody arrangement was pretty fair. It was 1 week on, 1 week off. Shortly after their divorce, Angela went back to Alabama to visit some of her friends and family, and a man named Christopher Jackson. Christopher and Angela were high school sweethearts. A few weeks after she returns home from that trip, she discovers that she is pregnant with Christopher's baby.
He ended up coming up to Minot to be with her, and eventually they were engaged.
Angela and Chris, they weren't lovey-dovey, like hanging all over each other, that sort of thing, but you could see an admiration that they had for one another. Angela liked school. She had drive. She talked about how much she liked to help people, so being a nurse made sense for a field for her.
Angela enrolls in nursing school. Christopher gets a job at Walmart working overnights, and the two are really trying to make a life together.
28-year-old Angela gave birth to her third child in 2013. And in October 2015, she learned she was pregnant with her fourth.
She was happy. She seemed happy.
But just 2 months into her pregnancy, authorities have been called to Angela and Christopher's home, where Angela has been found stabbed to death with their 19-month-old son in the next room.
I met with patrol officers. They kind of updated me what they had found and what they've seen.
One of the things that the police officers discussed was they could not figure out why Christopher did not go into the house. Christopher instead had dialed 911. It served as a giant red flag to the other officers because if their wife or their children were in peril, any kind, they would have immediately gone into the house, no questions asked.
So we were keeping an eye on him and trying to work with him to get him to come down to the police department.
I saw Chris just for a split second being put into a squad car. It was so sad to see the people that you care about in that sort of situation, and there's nothing you can do.
Coming up, detectives learn about an enemy in Angela's life.
The people around have probably been through it. He doesn't like her, she doesn't like him.
And a new romance will be tested when it becomes the focus of the investigation.
I trust my
Let me
husband
tell you something,
100%.
Well, then you're wrong.
I don't think that apart they would have carried out this vicious murder, but I think that they fed off of each other quite well.
On the morning of November 13th, 2015, Minot police begin processing the home of 30-year-old Angela Wilder after she was discovered stabbed to death inside her bedroom.
Typical for us on our crime scene unit is we wait until the investigators determine what's going to be needed as far as processing of the crime scene. When we arrive on scene, we'll do a walkthrough. So Angela's body was in full rigor mortis. It was cold. She definitely had been deceased for several hours. She had an extensive amount of stab wounds, all concentrated around her neck and her upper torso, her shoulders.
You could tell that she was either pulled from the bed or slid out of the bed from the blood around Miss Wilder. You could tell just from the scene that there was a little bit of a struggle.
Angela, she had defensive wounds. She had some broken fingernails and some wounds to her hands.
So we asked that her fingernails be clipped for possible DNA evidence.
She was wearing just underwear and a shirt. We could see on her underwear the outline of what looked like a knife blade in blood. It looked like whoever had done this had possibly wiped or laid the weapon down on her.
We had the perfect knife print on her underwear, but there was no murder weapon found at the scene.
Detectives move on from the bedroom and determine that forced entry was made through the rear door of the home.
It looked like some damage to the back door, but there was nothing really obvious that made it appear as if someone had broken in to steal anything or ransack the home.
Authorities finish processing the scene and transport the victim's body to the medical examiner's office.
During the autopsy of Angela Wilder, we learned that she was stabbed nearly 40 times. When you've got such an overkill on somebody, it suggests that it's personal. We knew that we're going to have to start interviewing people within the victim's circle. I called the social services and I told them we had a 19-month-old that kind of needed to be cared for while we dealt with his father. We were questioning the fact that Chris Jackson did not go into the home. Everybody said, oh, if that was me, I would rush right in to see what happens.
At the station, detectives sit down with Angela's fiancé, Christopher Jackson, and ask him to walk them through the events of the previous evening.
Christopher Jackson's story was that he was dropped off at work at 10 p.m. on Thursday, the 12th of November, and that he worked the overnight shift at Walmart.
At midnight, his first break, he called Angela. And they talked for a little bit. His second break, around 2 a.m., he calls her again, and everything's fine.
But then there became a point where she quit answering his calls.
She always picks up whenever I call her. I said, okay, she's just tired. Shot her a text message, said, I love you, told her what was going on with the work and everything. 7 o'clock or 6:50 gets here, and I go to clock out, and I go walking out to the lot, because usually she's out there. And she's not out there this morning. So I called her to see where she was at.
Mm-hmm.
And I keep calling her. And she's not picking up the phone. So I call a taxi, because I figure she's just that tired.
When Christopher Jackson arrived back home, the rear door was kicked open.
Immediately I thought something was wrong. Her car is still here. She didn't leave. She would have answered the phone.
Did you go into the house?
Something in my stomach said not to.
So you never went in the house?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Even though your child's in there and your wife is in there?
I know it seems hard to understand.
I felt like he was scared to go in until somebody's in that situation and worried about what they're going to find. I don't think people really know how they're going to react. Everything that Mr. Jackson was telling the detectives seemed to be legitimate. He seemed to be being honest, but we couldn't just take his word for it. We would have to cooperate with Walmart and just make sure that he's not in any way involved in this murder.
Detectives ask if they can take samples of his DNA for comparison. He quickly complies.
Then the detectives give him a little break for a little bit. And in that break, the camera is still rolling in the interview room. And it catches Christopher calling Angela's sister.
They find Richie Wilder.
At this point, we needed more information on what he knew about Richie's involvement in this murder.
In Minot, North Dakota, the fiancée of murder victim Angela Wilder has just called out Angela's ex-husband as a person of interest, and detectives need to know why. They return to the interrogation room and press Christopher Jackson for more details.
What's her relationship like with Richie?
If you can name it, they've probably been through it. He doesn't like her, she doesn't like him.
According to Christopher, Angela confided in him that her marriage to Richie ended under volatile circumstances.
He was beating the out of her, and they got divorced over it.
Christopher claims the conflict continued even after their divorce.
There was constant fighting over the custody of the kids to the point where Angela and Richie couldn't even do the weekly exchange.
Angela was having like anxiety attacks and just panicking and stuff after seeing him, so instead of her taking and dropping off the kids and everything, I always went, so I walked the kids in so she never had to see him or anything.
Detectives knew that they would have to verify Christopher's alibi, and now it was time to talk to Richie Wilder.
Detectives end their interview with Christopher, and a few hours later bring Richie in for questioning.
Hello. Hi, are you Richie?
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Richie. My name's Detective Krista McNice. This is Sergeant Detective Dave Goodman.
We're doing an investigation here, and obviously this is serious.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, Angela's dead.
Oh, really?
He made the comment very nonchalantly, oh, really? And didn't seem to be too concerned about that at all. I'll tell you what, there's a lot of fingers pointing right at you.
Well, yeah. Because I'm her ex-husband, right?
Well, you're her ex-husband, and you guys have a volatile relationship.
Yeah.
Your history.
Yeah, we don't have a good history.
Richie denies abusing Angela and instead makes his own shocking accusation.
Richie claims that Angela started abusing their older daughter.
She abused twice. I reported her both times. At the same time, I ended up filing for divorce.
Richie claims he would never hurt his ex-wife, but detectives are skeptical.
How can you prove to me that I'm looking at the wrong person?
Well, I don't know when this happened, but I know yesterday I was with my kids, and Cindy came home, and we had dinner, and I went to work, and I came home, and then I slept.
Richie explains that Cynthia Wilder, or Cindy to her friends and family, is his current wife. They had met in 2012 while working part-time at the Minot Vocational Center.
Richie is quirky and funny, and Cynthia right away is just really taken by this guy and really enjoys his personality. She actually went through the employee directory and found Richie's number and texted him and asked him if he was available for a date that night. Within a few months, they're living together.
Richie seemed nice and cordial, and she was happy and doing good, and it seemed like life was really good for her.
And by April, Cynthia was pregnant.
The couple married in August 2013.
After Cindy has their daughter, she graduates from Minot State University with a degree in teaching. It wasn't long before she was offered a position to have her own kindergarten room.
She loved teaching and loved having all the kids and all the different things she was doing. And so, yeah, it seemed like life was really good for her, and I was happy about that.
Richie Wilder said that his wife was in bed, Cindy Wilder was in bed, and that she could verify that he was at home all night. I had noticed while we were sitting there talking with Richie that he had a scratch on his cheek, and it was clear at the autopsy that Angela Wilder had fought back.
What happened to your face?
Where?
You
Right
get
here?
a scratch in your
Yeah,
face.
that's from Alison. We play wrestle/play fight.
Richie complies with detectives' request to photograph the scratch and collect his DNA.
We ended up getting search warrants for Richie's car as well as Cindy Wilder's Honda Pilot. And after that, he was free to leave for the time being.
Following his release, detectives head to the elementary school where Cindy Wilder works to corroborate Richie's alibi.
We're investigating something that has to do with Richie's ex-wife, Angela.
She's dead. And we need to get to the bottom of it. Telling her the information about Angela, she also didn't seem to be overly concerned about that news.
The detectives asked Cynthia to confirm Richie's alibi, and Cynthia repeats it almost verbatim.
He got home like 11:30, 11:45.
Were you awake when you got home?
I was in bed, but I was still awake, yes.
She said she woke up several times throughout the night to check on their children.
Where was he at when you got up? He was in bed all 3 times you woke up? Okay.
Detectives wrap up Cindy's interview and proceed with the warrant to search her car.
On the passenger door, as I was photographing, I noticed what looked like just a small stain on the inside of the door panel. We took a swab of that sample.
Detectives then execute the search warrant on the couple's apartment and Richie's car.
We did that search and did not locate anything of any evidentiary value that would help us in this murder investigation.
With their suspicions growing against Richie and Cindy, detectives speak to Angela's friends and family about her relationship with her ex-husband.
Richie did make accusations that Angela had been abusing their kids. I personally do not think that was even possible. I never saw that side of her.
Angela Wilder's mother and her sister said that he was lying and that there's no way that it had gone down the way that he had said. They both indicated that Richie Wilder had a very volatile relationship with Angela. They said that Richie had choked her while they were in base housing. So he was eventually court-martialed for that and was given a dishonorable discharge from the military. It was brought up several times by family that Richie's the one that's responsible. Richie's the one that we need to be looking at.
The main working theory was he planned to just remove her from the picture because then he wouldn't have to worry about any issues with custody.
He's got the strongest motive that we have heard so far, but we just don't have the proof.
Detectives received the DNA results from the crime lab nearly a month later.
The blood swab that was collected from the front door of Cindy's Honda Pilot came back to be Angela Wilder's blood. So we knew at that point Cindy had some involvement. The analysis of the fingernail clippings showed that there was DNA under Angela's fingernails. DNA that could be matched to Richie Wilder.
Nearly 1 month into the murder investigation of Angela Wilder, detectives have uncovered evidence that her ex-husband, Richie Wilder, is likely responsible.
The DNA that was found underneath Angela's fingernails was in fact Richie's DNA.
That seemed to match the scratch that Richie had on his face.
Richie's current wife, Cindy, is also under suspicion after Angela's blood was found in her vehicle. But detectives need more proof in order to arrest her.
We felt like we had enough to start on the arrest warrant for Richie Wilder.
On December 18th, detectives receive their warrant and locate Richie at a local gym.
We were dressed with police vests and had some members of the SWAT team with us.
Richie immediately requests a lawyer.
He has no interest in talking whatsoever, so they go ahead and book him and put him into the Ward County Jail.
That afternoon, detectives bring Cindy in for further questioning.
The detectives tell her that her husband has been arrested for murder, and she says there's no way, and she proceeds to be just defiant.
You're trying to rattle my bones.
Okay, Cindy, we wouldn't do this if we didn't have proof. Whose blood do you think is in the Honda?
I don't know.
I'll tell you, Angela's blood.
Where was it?
It was in the Honda.
He didn't leave the house that
Yes,
night.
he did.
He did leave the house that night.
No, he didn't. I was up several times with the kids and he was out cold.
That's not true.
That's not true.
Cindy Wilder stuck to her story. She just would not talk to us about anything incriminating involving Richie Wilder or herself. We still were very suspicious of Cindy Wilder, but we also knew that there's probably no way that we would ever prove this. We had no reason to hold her, and she was released and allowed to go about her day.
As news of Richie's arrest spreads, friends and family are shocked.
We see his mugshot pop up on our Facebook feed, and rumor mills start going around like crazy. Everyone is thinking, how is he being tied to this murder? Like, what are the circumstances?
As soon as I found out, I had called Cindy and asked her, what's going on, and she obviously was very distraught and upset and said, I don't know, but they're wrong and he has nothing to do with this. Cindy said he was a great guy, but just kind of watching them interact, I felt like maybe he was controlling and she was kind of going along with it. I didn't know how involved she was or wasn't, but I always felt that she knew more than she was willing to at least tell me.
In March 2016, 4 months after the murder, detectives get a call from Richie's lawyer.
He said that Richie wanted to tell us exactly what happened. Detective Mattias and I went to the Ward County Sheriff's Department and asked that they have Richie Wilder brought up from the jail. His attorney was there.
Richie begins his statement by implicating Angela Wilder's fiancé.
He proceeds to tell the detectives this crazy, outlandish story of how Christopher had somehow recruited him into a plot to get rid of Angela.
Chris said he kind of came up with an idea to, where I could get full custody of my kids and he could get full custody of his. And he said he thought that she was cheating on him,
So according to Richie, the night of November 13th at 2 a.m., a phone call comes in from Christopher Jackson.
He's like, I'm pretty sure that guy's there. He's like, why don't you come down and get me? And then, we'll head up and catch him in the act. So I was like, all right. So I just threw some clothes on real quick, got in the car, drove to Walmart. We drove back to his house. We went in, and I just followed him. Went up some stairs and went through like a living room with a light on or whatever. And then he opened the bedroom door. It looked like there was two people in the bed. And of course, when we pulled back the cover, the first thing I noticed, there wasn't a person on the bed. That was a body pillow. But he grabbed her and he just started stabbing her. And, he just kept stabbing her. And I was like, what the f*** are you doing, man? I ran over there.
He's in tears as he's explaining this. And he said he went over there and checked for a pulse.
There was just blood everywhere. And as I would touch her pulse, whatever, she leaned up and scratched the mess out of my face. I grabbed her hands. She was just like, I love you.
Detective Matthijs and I were just letting Mr. Wilder talk and tell this story. He just kept digging his hole deeper and deeper.
3 months after being arrested for the murder of his ex-wife, Angela Wilder, Richie calls a meeting with detectives and points the finger at Angela's fiancé, Christopher Jackson.
The detectives had just received a fresh batch of video surveillance footage from Walmart the night before they were scheduled to meet with Richie. And they had gone through every single minute, every single second of that video.
We were very comfortable and 100% sure that Mr. Jackson did not leave the Walmart.
When detectives confront Richie, he continues to stick to his new story.
What you're telling us does not fit. Because I know that Chris did not leave Walmart during the hours that you say that he did.
He did, though.
I know he didn't because I watched it on video. I watched the minutes click by. I just watched that. But you're giving us details that indicate that you were there, and I think you killed him.
I didn't kill anybody.
I think you killed Angela.
I didn't.
Who did then? Because you were there.
Yeah, I told you Chris did.
You can't make it fit. It doesn't.
He looked at his attorney. His attorney said, you can stop talking at any time. And he said, I want to stop now. So then at that point, he knew that story wasn't going to get him out of this murder.
9 months later, in December of 2016, Richie Wilder's murder trial gets underway.
Richie was in the front with his lawyer, and he looked professional, but he seemed to always have a smug look on his face.
The prosecution presents strong physical evidence, citing DNA evidence that ties Richie to the crime.
Angela's blood had been found in Cindy's car, and Richie's DNA had been found underneath her fingernails. One of the things that the prosecution did have to kind of overcome is that the murder weapon had never been found.
After a 4-day trial, the jury reaches a verdict.
We felt that we were making the correct decision, deeming him guilty.
When I found out Richie was convicted, life without parole, I thought that was pretty awesome, actually.
I heard Cynthia crying in the back. She was so committed to her husband and how he was a good man and he wouldn't do this. Just almost like she had such a hatred as well for Angela. I always had a thought that she was involved somehow.
Cindy loved to get on camera and tell her sob story. There was several times she'd be crying and still expressing her support for her husband and claiming that he didn't do it.
None of it makes any sense to me at all. Like, he's a good man. He's a good husband.
3 months later, detectives receive information that sheds light on the role Cindy played in Angela's murder.
In March of 2017, Matt Walters, a friend of Cindy Wilder's, told us about a Facebook conversation that he was having with Cindy Wilder, and she was making some admissions during that conversation that sounded like she was involved in the murder.
When did you first start talking to Cynthia through the Facebook messages?
She messaged me end of March this year. She started off saying a really leading comment about how the knife wasn't supposed to be the main plan. It was supposed to be a gun, that the knife was a backup.
Detectives ask Matt if he'd be willing to talk to Cindy again, this time while wearing a wire.
He was willing to let us wire his vehicle so he could drive around with Cindy and see if he could get her to make some admissions on her involvement in the murder of Angela Wilder. He made contact with Cindy Wilder, and they go out to a local bar, spent several hours there, and ended up driving home and sat in the driveway. And she began to talk about how they had planned this, how they worked together, planning the murder.
Are you mad at your husband?
No, like I'm proud of him. I'm just pissed that he got caught and that he got sloppy and impatient, and we like had this thing like planned for like 2 years.
3 months after Richie Wilder was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of his ex-wife Angela, Minot, North Dakota detectives are building their case against his current wife Cindy after she implicates herself in the murder plot.
Matt Walter's vehicle was wired, and Matt slowly got her to start talking about her involvement in the case. She was telling him that they were fighting over the kids all the time.
We had split custody, and I know like their mom just talked about me and Richie. Like I know that. She would like call social services on Richie and I.
Cindy says that September 2013, they had a custody hearing, and afterwards she had said to Richie, wouldn't it just be easier if Angela was no longer in our lives?
It's kind of fun just talking about it, just like that rush. And then next thing I know, it's like, it's gonna go down tonight.
Detectives listen as Cindy tells Matt that on November 13th, she and Richie put their plan into action.
Like, she put up a good fight. Like, she did.
Well, I'm sure she was fighting for her
scratched his
life.
face, like, and that's what got him too, was, like, if it was me, I would have gone back and cut her fingers off. I would have burned them. I would have lit the house on fire.
Do you think you're a horrible person, or do you think it needed to be done? Because now you've said both.
I fully believe that it needed to be done. Like, I helped him. We had this planned out. And he it up. Because he didn't clean the car good enough. One spot of blood in my car.
Cindy's taped confession is more than enough for prosecutors to charge her as a co-conspirator.
On May 19th, Detective Mattice and I went to Washington Elementary School, where Cindy Wilder was now currently working as a kindergarten teacher.
She did not say anything. Much like Richie, once she was arrested, there was nothing more that she was going to say.
In November of 2017, Cindy enters an Alford plea of conspiracy to commit murder.
She accepts the fact that the evidence that the state has against her is overwhelming and enough to convict her on this charge. So she pleads guilty without actually admitting any wrongdoing.
In May 2018, Cindy appears in the courtroom for sentencing.
Cynthia has an opportunity to plead with the court, basically, and tell her side of the story before the judge issues her ruling on punishment.
This is kind of an open plea, so that it's up to the judge what she wants to pose for a sentence. There was recordings replayed of Cindy saying that Angela's fingers should have been cut off and the house burned down.
And so Cindy kind of downplays a little bit the information that she had shared with Matt by saying that she was trying to brag. That didn't really go over very well, given the fact that not many people brag about a brutal murder.
The judge hit her with the strongest sentence she could give her, which was life without parole.
When I found out that Cindy was going to go to prison for life without parole, I understood it, but it's just super hard because I've lost a daughter. But do I think she deserved to be punished? Absolutely.
I don't think that apart, Richie or Cindy would have carried out this vicious murder. But I think that they fed off of each other quite well.
Love can make people do crazy things, things that you don't think about consequences in the long run.
Well, isn't it said, love makes people do crazy things? Yeah. But I don't see love in this. I don't see love at all. I see the love between Angela and Chris. That was love.
It begins with a sound no one in that neighborhood ever forgot. Not a scream, not a gunshot, just a phone ringing in an empty apartment at 2:17 a.m., unanswered, echoing off the walls of a third-floor walk-up on the south side of Chicago, a place where the radiators hissed like restless animals and the streetlights flickered as if they were about to give up. By sunrise, the phone was still ringing. By noon, the door was still locked from inside. By nightfall, the city would have a new cold case, one that would refuse to stay buried. Chicago, 2003, a city already hardened by headlines. Murders that barely made the back page. Missing persons flyers peeling off bus stops. Sirens as common as traffic lights. But this one landed differently. It crept. It lingered. It unsettled even veteran detectives who thought they'd seen every variation of human cruelty. Her name was Elena Morales, 27 years old, a paralegal by day, a bartender on weekends, the kind of woman who kept pepper spray in her coat pocket and still called her mother every Sunday night. She lived alone, paid her rent on time, and had no criminal record, no known enemies, no dramatic secrets that would later make sense of what happened to her. On February 14th, Valentine's Day, she clocked out early. Her co-workers remembered that part clearly. She said she wasn't feeling well. No date, no plans, just a tired smile and a shrug. She walked out into the cold with her scarf pulled up to her nose and vanished into the city. When Elena didn't show up for work the next morning, no one panicked. Chicago teaches patience. When she missed 2 shifts, her manager called her cell, straight to voicemail. When her mother couldn't reach her by Sunday night, the unease began to spread. Police forced the door open on February 18th. The apartment was spotless. Too spotless. No sign of a struggle. No broken glass. No overturn the furniture. The bed was made. The bathroom sink dry. Her purse sat on the kitchen counter, wallet inside, cash untouched. Keys hung neatly on a hook by the door. Her winter coat was gone. And there was one thing that didn't belong. A single red glove. Not a pair. Just one. It lay on the floor near the couch, fingers curled inward as if it had been dropped mid-motion. It didn't match any gloves Elena owned. Different size, different brand. No fibers linking it to anything else in the apartment. No prints. No explanation. Detectives called it a walkaway. For about 12 hours. Then the autopsy report came back empty because there was no body, no crime scene, no proof of death. And yet everyone in that room felt it. This wasn't a disappearance. It was a removal. Neighbors told police they heard nothing unusual that night. No arguments. No footsteps. One elderly man downstairs thought he heard a door close around 2 in the morning, but in a building like that, doors closed all the time. Another tenant mentioned a man standing across the street earlier that evening, smoking, watching the building, but couldn't describe his face. Just a silhouette under a broken street lamp. Surveillance cameras? None working. The bodega camera down the block had been broken for weeks. The ATM across the street recorded static that night. In 2003, the city was full of blind spots. and this case slipped neatly into all of them. Days passed, then weeks. Elena's face appeared on the evening news, her smile frozen into a headline. Missing woman, South Side. Tips came in, dozens of them. Sightings at train stations, bars, grocery stores. None checked out. Every lead dissolved the moment police tried to touch it. The glove went to the lab. Nothing. Phone records showed her last call was incoming at 2:11 a.m., a blocked number. It rang for 6 minutes. No voice made. No trace. Her cell never pinged again after that night. Detectives circled the usual suspects. Ex-boyfriend? Clean. Co-workers? Alibis checked. Neighbors? Nothing solid. The case slowed, then stalled. By summer, Elena Morales became a name detectives said with a sigh. By fall, the file grew thick but useless. By winter, the word cold entered the room for the first time. Cold case. Her mother refused to move her things. The apartment stayed exactly the same, like time had stopped waiting for Elena to come home. Flyers yellowed on telephone poles. Candlelight vigils dwindled. The city moved on, as it always does. But the glove stayed in evidence. Years passed. Chicago changed. New mayors. New scandals. New crimes. And somewhere in a storage room, a box labeled Morales, Elena, 2003 gathered dust. Until one night, nearly 2 decades later, when a man walked into a precinct on the north side and asked to speak to a detective. He didn't ask for a lawyer. He didn't give his name right away. He just said one sentence that froze the room. I know what happened to the girl with the red glove. The desk officer thought it was a drunk. Another false confession. Another ghost chasing attention. But the man didn't slur his words. His hands were steady. His eyes fixed on the floor like he was afraid to look up and see what he just unleashed. They brought him into an interview room. They turned on the recorder. And as the red light blinked to life, the past came rushing back, carrying with it a confession that would reopen a Chicago 2003 cold case and shock the police department to its core. The room smells like old coffee and disinfectant, the kind of place where time doesn't pass so much as it coagulates. And the man sits with his hands folded on the metal table, staring at the scratch marks carved there by other people who once thought they were about to tell the truth. The recorder hums softly, a mechanical breath waiting to inhale everything that comes next. And for a long moment, no one speaks because everyone in that room understands the weight of what he just said, understands how many years are pressing down on this chair, this table, this silence. He finally gives his name, Marcus Reed, 46 years old, construction foreman, no prior felony convictions. And when the detective across from him asks why he's here, he doesn't answer right away. He rubs his thumb against his wedding ring, slow and methodical, as if trying to sand it down to nothing. And then he says he's been thinking about it for a long time, longer than he wants to admit, because some things don't stay buried just because the city decides to forget them. They slide a photograph across the table, Elena Morales, frozen in that familiar smile, and Marcus's eyes flicker, not with surprise, but with recognition, sharp and immediate, the kind that hits before logic can step in and lie, and he exhales through his nose like he's just been punched somewhere deep. He says he didn't know her name back then, says he only knew the building, the street, the way the light hit the sidewalk that night, the way the cold crawled up through his shoes, and the detective's pen pauses because details like that don't come from headlines. They come from memory. He says he was there on Valentine's Day in 2003, standing across the street, smoking, watching the entrance to that walk-up, and the room tightens because that silhouette, that vague neighbor description, suddenly has a face. He tells it like a man reading a weather report, flat and measured, and that's what makes it worse. He says he was doing a favor for someone, says he was young and needed money and didn't ask the right questions, says Chicago was full of men who made requests you didn't refuse if you wanted to keep breathing without looking over your shoulder. He says he wasn't supposed to touch her, wasn't supposed to go inside, wasn't supposed to leave anything behind, and the detective asks him to slow down, asks him whose apartment it was, and Marcus closes his eyes for a second, just long enough to picture it, just long enough to open a door that hasn't been touched in years. He describes the hallway, the peeling paint, the sound of the radiator, details that line up with evidence photos no one outside the department ever saw. And when he mentions the red glove, just once casually like it's an afterthought, the detective's chair scrapes back hard enough to echo. He says it wasn't hers. He says it belonged to someone else, someone who panicked, someone who made a mistake. And suddenly the room isn't about whether this man is lying. It's about how much he knows and why he's choosing now to unload it. Marcus says the call came in around midnight. Instructions simple and brutal. Be there, watch the door, call if anything goes wrong. And he says he didn't know her, didn't follow her, didn't plan it. He just stood under a streetlight that barely worked, counting cars, counting steps, until another man showed up. A man he won't name yet. A man he describes only in fragments. Tall, expensive coat, careful hands. Someone who didn't look like he belonged in that neighborhood, but moved through it, like he owned it. He says the man went inside, and the door closed, and the city swallowed the sound like it always does. Time stretches in the room as Marcus talks, because outside these walls Chicago has moved on. But in here it's still February 2003, still cold enough to burn your lungs, still quiet enough that a single mistake could ruin everything. He says he waited longer than he was supposed to, that the plan went off script, that voices rose inside the apartment, not screaming, but urgent, sharp, the sound of control slipping. And he remembers thinking he should leave, remembers flicking his cigarette into the gutter, remembers the door opening again, fast, and the man coming out alone. The detective asks the question everyone is holding, asks where Elena Morales went, and Marcus doesn't answer right away, because this is the edge of it, the point of no return. And when he finally speaks, his voice is lower, heavier, like he's dragging it up from somewhere it doesn't want to come from. He says she didn't walk out. He says she was moved. He says there was a car, parked where no one would look twice, engine running, trunk open just long enough. And he says he didn't help lift her, didn't touch her, didn't want to know if she was alive or not, because knowing would make it impossible to keep breathing like this for 20 years. The room goes still. The recorder keeps humming. And somewhere in evidence storage, that red glove suddenly feels less like a mystery and more like a fingerprint pressing through time. Detectives pull the old file that night, spread it across a conference table like a body on a slab. Every report, every dead lead, every note scribbled in the margins by cops who retired, transferred, or died without ever knowing this moment was coming. Marcus's statements line up in uncomfortable ways. Angles snapping into place that no one noticed before. The blocked call, the neighbor's silhouette, the absence of struggle, the immaculate apartment, the sense that Elena didn't vanish so much as she was extracted. This isn't a confession yet, not the kind that closes a case, but it's a crack, and cold cases don't need much more than that to start bleeding again. They verify what they can. Marcus Reed was in Chicago in 2003. He worked construction 2 blocks from Elena's building. Phone records are gone, lost to time, but employment logs, old pay stubs, faded calendars confirm his presence, his proximity, and detectives feel that familiar, dangerous mix of hope and dread. Hope because something is finally moving. Dread because movement means answers, and answers are rarely clean. When they bring Marcus back in the next day, he looks smaller, like the night stripped something off him he can't put back on. And he asks for water, asks how long this is going to take, asks if it's too late to stop talking, and no one answers that last one because they all know the truth. It's always too late once you start remembering out loud. He says he didn't come forward out of guilt alone. He says someone else talked first, not to police, but to him, a whisper from the past that reached him through an unexpected channel. A phone call that ended as abruptly as it began, a reminder that secrets rot, that people get careless. That time doesn't erase evidence. It just hides it until it's ready to surface. He won't say who made the call, but his hands shake now, and the detective notes that fear, real fear, not the performative kind, not the kind that disappears under pressure. They ask about the man in the expensive coat. Marcus says he thought he knew who he was back then, thought he was untouchable, connected, the kind of person whose name never appeared in reports even when it should have. And as he speaks, the outline of a different Chicago emerges, a city beneath the city, where favors are currency and silence is enforced not with guns, but with opportunity, with the promise of a future that looks normal enough to pass inspection. The red glove comes back into focus. No longer just an anomaly, but a mistake, a moment of chaos that didn't get cleaned up, and detectives revisit every photo, every angle, every lab report from 2003, armed now with context they didn't have before. They wonder whose glove it was, why it was there, what it touched before it hit the floor, and whether modern science can pull something out of it that the past couldn't. Outside the precinct, no one knows this is happening yet. There are no headlines, no breaking news banners, just a handful of people working late under fluorescent lights, aware that they're standing at the edge of something that could either collapse under scrutiny or explode into the kind of revelation that rewrites a case everyone stopped believing in. The name Elena Morales hangs in the air again, not as a forgotten file number, but as a presence, a reminder of why this matters, why cold cases aren't just about the past, they're about the damage that never stopped spreading. Marcus Reed is escorted back to a holding cell, and as the door closes, the sound echoes down the corridor, metallic and final. And for the first time in nearly 20 years, the Chicago 2003 cold case is no longer sleeping. It's awake, restless, and demanding answers. And somewhere out there, someone else feels it too, feels the pressure shifting, feels the city turning its attention back toward a night they thought was safely buried. The confession has opened the door, but what waits on the other side is still in shadow. And the deeper detectives dig, the more they realize this wasn't just one mistake, one bad night, one vanished woman. It was a chain carefully assembled, quietly maintained, and now, link by link, it's starting to rattle. And in Chicago, when old chains start to move, they don't do it quietly. The first thing detectives do is go back to the glove because objects don't forget the way people do, and this one has been waiting patiently in a sealed plastic bag, red leather dulled by time, creases frozen exactly where a human hand once bent them. In 2003, it gave them nothing, no usable prints, no blood, no fibers worth chasing. But science has a longer memory now, and as the evidence tech lifts it with gloved fingers, everyone in the room understands that this small, ordinary thing might finally decide to speak. The lab lights hum. The bag is opened. The glove breathes again for the first time in 20 years. While the glove goes back under the microscope, detectives split the case open in other directions, because cold cases don't thaw evenly. They crack along stress lines you didn't know were there. And Marcus Reed has introduced a new one, the man in the expensive coat. They pull photos from old surveillance archives, grainy stills of men who moved through that neighborhood in 2003 without belonging to it, real estate developers, consultants, political fixers, anyone who had reason to be there and the money to disappear afterward. Faces blur together. Suits change. Hairstyles age. But the question sharpens instead of fading. Who had the power to make a woman vanish without leaving a trace? They bring Marcus back into the room, not to press him harder, but to listen differently. He's calmer now, resigned in the way people get when the worst thing has already happened and there's no energy left to fight the aftermath. He talks about fear, about how it changes the way you see the city, how every shadow becomes a threat, and every knock on the door sounds like the end of your life. He says he didn't know Elena Morales personally, but he knew her type, young, independent, careful enough to feel safe and brave enough to live alone. And there's a flicker of shame in his voice when he admits that people like her were easy targets precisely because they trusted the routines that kept them alive. He remembers the car more clearly now, a dark sedan, clean, newer than most things parked on that block, idling softly, the trunk opening and closing with controlled efficiency, no slamming, no panic. He remembers thinking how quiet it all was, how wrong that quiet felt, and how quickly the city accepted it anyway. When detectives ask where the car went, he shakes his head. North, maybe, or west. Chicago has too many exits for certainty to survive. The timeline tightens. Elena's last confirmed sighting. The block call. The estimated time the car could have moved without triggering notice. Analysts map it out like a chessboard, projecting routes, disposal sites, places that existed in 2003 and are gone now, paved over, redeveloped, erased in the name of progress. Every possibility feels both promising and hopeless, because this isn't just about finding where she went, It's about understanding how she was allowed to disappear so completely. News of the reopened case leaks anyway, the way it always does, and suddenly Elena Morales is back in the headlines. Her name threaded through phrases like cold case reopened and surprise confession, words that hit the community like a reopen wound. Her mother, older now, quieter, hears it on the radio while making coffee. And for a moment the kitchen tilts, time folding in on itself until it's 2003 again, and she's waiting for a phone call that never comes. Reporters gather outside the precinct. Neighbors from the old building talk to cameras, remembering things they hadn't thought about in years. The man across the street, the broken light, the way the cold lingered that winter longer than usual. The lab calls with a preliminary result. Not a miracle, not closure, but something that changes the temperature of the room. Trace DNA. Partial. Inconclusive on its own, but enough to enter into databases that didn't exist when the glove first went into storage. It's a whisper, not a shout, but cold cases survive on whispers. Detectives submit it, wait, and feel the familiar ache of anticipation settle into their bones. In the meantime, they chase the network Marcus hinted at, the invisible scaffolding that holds crimes like this together long after the people involved pretend they've moved on. They find shell companies tied to addresses near Elena's building, businesses that changed hands quickly after 2003, paper trails that lead nowhere until you look at who benefited from their disappearance. Names surface and sink. Alibis get re-examined under harsher light. Old favors are remembered by people who thought no one else noticed. Marcus is transferred to a more secure holding area. Not charged yet, not free, suspended in that legal purgatory reserved for men who know too much and haven't finished talking. He asks if Elena's body has been found, and when the detective says no, his shoulders sag with a complicated relief that makes everyone uncomfortable. Relief that he didn't have to see the end of it. Relief that the city hid it so well. Guilt, too, thick and unresolved. He tells them something new, something small but sharp, about the man in the coat making a phone call after it was over, stepping a few feet away, lowering his voice, using a phrase Marcus didn't understand at the time but never forgot. It's handled. 2 words that carry the weight of an entire philosophy. The belief that problems don't need to be solved, they just need to be removed from sight. Detectives cross-reference that phrase with wiretap transcripts from unrelated cases, organized crime investigations, corruption probes that brushed against the edges of something bigger but never quite caught it. Patterns emerge, not enough for warrants, but enough to suggest that Elena Morales didn't fall into a random act of violence. She intersected with something intentional, deliberate, designed to leave no witnesses and no noise. The community feels it too, this shift, this sense that the story they told themselves for years, that she just vanished, that life is cruel and chaotic, might not be enough anymore. Candlelight vigils return, smaller but fiercer, people standing in the cold again, holding her photo, refusing to let the case slip back into storage now that it's finally breathing. Social media fills the gaps where official statements won't go, speculation blooming like mold in the dark, names being whispered without evidence, the danger of attention growing alongside its necessity. The DNA database responds days later, not with a match, but with a near miss, a familial connection so distant it's almost cruel, a hint of a bloodline that might lead somewhere if investigators are patient and lucky. It's another crack, another thread, and they pull it gently, aware that yanking too hard could snap it forever. Genealogists get involved. Old family trees are resurrected. Surnames intersect with neighborhoods, with jobs, with opportunities that line up just a little too neatly with the man in the coat Marcus described. As the investigation stretches forward, the past pushes back, witnesses recanting statements made decades ago, others suddenly eager to talk now that the statute of limitations has shifted or fear has lost its teeth. A former building manager admits records were altered. A parking enforcement officer remembers ticketing a dark sedan that night, but can't find the citation anymore. Each detail is fragile, contested, but together they form a picture that refuses to stay blurred. And through it all, Elena remains at the center, not as a symbol, not as a headline, but as a presence, a woman whose absence warped a community and whose story is finally forcing itself back into the light. Detectives feel the pressure mounting from the public, from the department, from the knowledge that reopening a cold case isn't just about finding the truth, it's about surviving what that truth might expose. Because if Marcus Reed is telling the truth, if the man in the expensive coat existed, if Elena Morales was removed as part of a larger machinery, then this isn't just a story about one night in 2003. It's a story about how easily a city can look away when silence is convenient, about how many hands can touch a crime without leaving fingerprints, about how long it takes for the past to decide it's done waiting. The chain Marcus spoke of is no longer rattling quietly. It's pulling taut, link by link, stretching across years and careers and reputations. And somewhere, someone who believed they were untouchable is starting to feel it tighten. The Chicago 2003 cold case is no longer asking to be solved. It's demanding to be confronted. The pressure doesn't announce itself with sirens or subpoenas. It arrives quietly, the way winter does in Chicago, seeping into corners, stiffening joints, making every movement feel heavier than it should. Detectives feel it first in the phone calls that don't get returned, the meetings that are postponed without explanation, the sudden politeness from people who used to be blunt. When a cold case starts pointing upward instead of outward, the air in the room changes, and everyone knows it even if no one says it. They start with the car, not because it's the strongest lead, but because it's the most human. Cars leave marks. They get ticketed, serviced, washed. Someone remembers them. Analysts rebuild the parking patterns from that block in 2003. Old city data stitched together with handwritten logs and yellow notebooks pulled from storage rooms that smell like dust and resignation. The dark sedan becomes less abstract, narrowed by model years, by engine sounds Marcus described without realizing he was doing it, by the way he said the trunk closed softly, hydraulics still new enough to feel luxurious. It's a long shot, but long shots are what cold cases run on. A retired parking enforcement officer comes in, hands shaking slightly as he signs a consent form, memory flickering like a bad signal. He remembers the night because it was Valentine's Day and because he hated working holidays, remembers ticketing a car that didn't belong, remembers thinking it was odd how clean it was for that neighborhood, how the driver didn't argue, just nodded and waited. The ticket number is gone. The database purged years ago, but the officer remembers the first letter of the plate, or thinks he does, and detectives write it down anyway, knowing that half-remembered details sometimes carry more truth than official records. The glove comes back from the lab with more context now. The partial DNA traced through distant relatives, mapped across states, across decades, a family tree growing sideways instead of up, full of branches that lead nowhere and a few that bend toward Chicago in the early 2000s. One surname repeats, not common enough to ignore, not rare enough to scream, tied to a cluster of addresses within a few miles of Elena's apartment. One of those addresses belonged, briefly, to a shell company that folded 6 months after her disappearance. Detectives knock on doors that haven't been touched by this case in 20 years. Some people answer with confusion, others with practiced indifference, a few with fear that leaks through no matter how carefully they try to seal it. A man in his 70s admits he worked security for a developer back then, admits he remembers a night when things went wrong, admits he was paid extra to forget it, and then asks, quietly, whether the statute of limitations applies to forgetting. The detective doesn't answer directly, because forgetting isn't a crime, but facilitating it sometimes is. Marcus Reed watches all of this from a distance he didn't know existed, caught between cooperation and collapse. He asks for a lawyer now, not because he wants to stop talking, but because he's finally aware of the shape of what he's stepped into. His attorney advises him to stay quiet, to protect himself, and Marcus nods, but later that night he asks to speak to detectives again, says there's one more thing he can't carry alone. He talks about money, about how it appeared in his account weeks after the disappearance. Not enough to be obvious, just enough to smooth rough edges, and how he never questioned where it came from, because questioning felt like an invitation to disappear himself. The man in the expensive coat gains edges, then weight. Detectives attach timelines, travel records, overlapping appearances at fundraisers and zoning meetings, a life lived in the open that never quite intersects with the shadows except at this one point. He was powerful adjacent, not famous, not elected, but useful, the kind of person who made problems solvable. His name doesn't appear in the original case file at all, which now feels less like an oversight and more like design. Internal conversations grow tense. Supervisors caution patience. Legal reminds everyone of evidentiary thresholds. Someone uses the word sensitive, and it hangs in the air like a warning. The city doesn't like reopening old wounds if they bleed into present-day offices, and this one is starting to look arterial. Detectives push anyway, because once a case is awake, it doesn't let you sleep until you deal with it. Elena's mother agrees to an interview, her voice steady in a way that hurts to listen to. She talks about the years that passed without answers, about birthdays that felt like crimes, about the way hope mutates when it's left alone too long. She says she doesn't care who gets embarrassed or exposed. She just wants to know where her daughter went, wants to know if she was afraid, wants to know if she called out for anyone who never came. The room goes quiet after that, the kind of quiet that changes how people behave. The media pressure intensifies. Anonymous sources leak fragments, enough to suggest influence, not enough to prove it. Commentators argue on television, some calling it a witch hunt, others calling it long overdue. The word cover-up starts circulating heavy and dangerous, and the department issues careful statements about process and integrity. Behind closed doors, task forces expand, then contract, then expand again, resources allocated and reallocated like pieces on a board that keeps shifting. The glove's DNA finally resolves into something more solid. Not a direct match, but a lineage that points to a man who died years ago, a man who worked briefly as a driver, a fixer, someone who moved cars and messages and people without asking why. His employment records intersect with the shell company, with the address near Elena's building, with the man in the coat's orbit. It's circumstantial, but it's converging, and convergence is what cold cases pray for. Detectives locate the driver's surviving family, tread carefully through grief that has nothing to do with this case until it suddenly does. A sister remembers a glove, red, expensive, a gift he couldn't afford, remembers him losing it one winter and being unusually angry about it. Remembers a night when he came home late and silent, smelling like cold metal, and something else she couldn't name. She doesn't want to believe any of it, but belief isn't required for truth to exist. The search shifts toward geography, toward places where a body could disappear in 2003 and never resurface. Construction sites that became condos, landfills that closed, industrial corridors that changed names and faces. Ground-penetrating radar is discussed, then delayed, then quietly approved. Every decision feels weighted, watched, as if the case itself has learned to resist being solved. Marcus's fear sharpens into urgency. He says the man in the coat used a phrase again during a later encounter, months after the disappearance, something about loose ends, something about how the city rewards people who know how to tidy up. Marcus realizes now that the phone call he received years later, the one that pushed him to come forward, wasn't a threat, but a warning, a signal that the past was no longer contained. He says he thinks someone is trying to get ahead of the story before it finishes telling itself. Late one night, a detective finds an old memo buried in an unrelated corruption file, a single line referencing a Valentine's issue that was resolved externally. No names, no details, just enough to feel intentional. It's dated 2 weeks after Elena vanished. The detective stares at it longer than necessary, feeling the slow burn of anger that comes when you realize how thin the line is between justice and convenience. The case reaches a moment of suspension, balanced between exposure and collapse. Warrants are drafted, revised, delayed. People lawyer up. Phones go silent. And yet, beneath all of it, there's movement, subtle but undeniable, like ice cracking under weight. Someone is nervous. Someone is preparing. Someone is remembering details they hoped were gone for good. Elena's name appears again on flyers, this time printed fresh, taped to poles that have seen 3 administrations and countless disappearances. People stop to read. Some remember her, some don't. But the city feels it, this old story resurfacing, this reminder that not everything lost stays lost forever. As Part 4 closes, the Chicago 2003 cold case stands at a threshold. No longer just an investigation, but a reckoning, the kind that doesn't resolve neatly, the kind that asks not only who did it, but who allowed it, who benefited, who stayed quiet. The answers are closer now, close enough to be dangerous, and the city holds its breath, waiting to see which way the truth will fall when it finally hits the ground. The warrants don't land all at once. They arrive in pieces, staggered, careful, designed not to tip over the entire structure before anyone understands how tall it really is. A bank here, a phone record there, a property transaction buried under 3 layers of corporate names. Each approval feels like a small victory, but every victory carries the awareness that someone, somewhere, is watching the moves being made and adjusting their own in response. Cold cases don't just wake up suspects. They wake up systems. The financial trail tightens first. Not dramatically, not with a smoking gun, but with the kind of quiet irregularities that make auditors uneasy. Payments routed through consulting fees. Bonuses paid early. Debts forgiven without explanation. Marcus Reed's account stands out now not as an anomaly, but as part of a pattern, a constellation of small transfers orbiting a central gravity that still doesn't have a name on paper. Detectives map it all out on a wall. Strings connecting faces and numbers and dates. A web that looks almost elegant in its complexity, almost respectable. They bring Marcus in again, this time with documents laid out in front of him, bank statements, timelines, photographs of places he swore he never entered. He studies them slowly, the way a man looks at a past he can't argue with anymore. He doesn't deny the money. He doesn't deny the meetings. What he denies is intention. He says he never wanted anyone dead, never wanted Elena gone. Says he thought it was intimidation, leverage, something ugly but temporary. He says Chicago teaches you to live with half-truths because the full ones are too heavy to carry. The detectives don't challenge him on that. They let the silence do the work. They know now that whether Marcus intended it or not doesn't change the shape of what happened. Elena Morales didn't come home. The city absorbed her absence, and someone, somewhere, decided that outcome was acceptable. Attention shifts to the shell company, the one that flickered into existence near Elena's building and vanished months later. Its records are thin by design, but the signatures repeat, the handwriting consistent across documents meant to look unrelated. A name surfaces, not the man in the expensive coat, but someone adjacent, a proxy, a legal buffer whose job was to stand between decisions and consequences. He's still alive. He still practices law. He still answers his phone. The interview is tense but polite, the kind of conversation where everyone pretends this is routine even as the air thickens with implication. He denies everything directly, calmly, says his firm handled dozens of entities like that in the early 2000s, that memory fades, that without specifics there's nothing to discuss. But when detectives mention Valentine's Day, just in passing, his jaw tightens for half a second before he smooths it over. It's enough. Not proof, but recognition. Outside, the city hums on, unaware of the gears grinding beneath it. Construction cranes swing over neighborhoods that didn't exist when Elena disappeared. Cafes open where factories once stood. The ground itself has been reimagined so many times that the idea of digging into it feels almost sacrilegious. And yet, that's exactly what the task force prepares to do. Ground-penetrating radar trucks roll into an industrial corridor slated for redevelopment. The paperwork justified by unrelated environmental surveys. Technicians move with practiced neutrality, eyes on screens that translate buried echoes into abstract shapes. Most of it is nothing. Pipes, debris, forgotten foundations. But then a shape appears that doesn't belong, a void where one shouldn't exist, a disturbance that suggests intention. The team marks it, logs it, schedules further analysis. No announcements, no conclusions, just a tightening focus. The media senses a shift, even without details. Coverage grows more cautious, more speculative. The tone changes from curiosity to anticipation. Commentators start using words like imminent and explosive, and the department pushes back, insisting on process, on restraint. Behind the scenes, the pressure mounts. Phones ring late. Emails arrive without subjects. Someone leaks the existence of the radar scan, and suddenly everyone wants to know what's under the city they walk across every day. Elena's mother is notified before anything goes public. She listens, silent, absorbing the careful language, the caveats, the warnings not to expect too much too fast. When the call ends, she sits alone at her kitchen table and stares at a photo of her daughter she's kept face down for years because looking at it felt like reopening a wound. She turns it over now, runs her fingers along the edges, and whispers something no one else hears. The legal barriers rise as quickly as the investigative ones fall. Defense attorneys appear preemptively, issuing statements about speculation and reputational harm. The man in the expensive coat, still unnamed publicly, hires a crisis firm. His appearances suddenly limited, his calendar cleared. He tells associates this is all noise, that nothing can touch him now, that too much time has passed. But time, in this case, has become an enemy rather than a shield. Marcus Reed is moved again, this time to protective custody. The official reason is safety. The unofficial one is momentum. He's become a liability to people who prefer stability, and he knows it. He sleeps poorly, jumps at sounds, replays that night in his head with new clarity, new horror. He tells a detective that he dreams about the trunk, about the way it closed, about the certainty in the man's voice when he said it was handled. The detective doesn't interrupt. There's nothing left to clarify. The radar scan is followed by excavation permits, slow and methodical, the kind that stretch days into weeks. Soil is removed layer by layer, cataloged, sifted. Reporters gather at a distance, cameras trained on nothing in particular, waiting for a sign. Workers uncover remnants of old infrastructure, discarded objects, the detritus of a city that never stops shedding its skin. And then they hit something that isn't infrastructure, something that resists in a way that feels different. Operations halt. Protocols kick in. Forensics arrive. The object is partial, degraded, but unmistakably human. Not enough to identify yet. Not enough to confirm. Enough to change everything. The news breaks anyway, faster than the department can contain it. A body, a possible match, a cold case that may no longer be cold. The city reacts in waves, shock rippling outward. People who never knew Elena suddenly invested in her fate. Others remembering where they were in 2003, what they believed then, what they told themselves to keep going. Social media ignites. Names trend. Accusations fly ahead of facts. The man in the expensive coat issues a statement expressing sympathy, distancing himself from any involvement, condemning speculation. His words are careful, polished, vetted. Detectives read it in silence, noting what it doesn't say. No denial of proximity. No mention of knowing Elena. Just grief at a safe distance. The remains are analyzed, the process painstaking. The result's a mix of relief and devastation. The timeline aligns. The location fits. Dental records are inconclusive, but a fragment of jewelry is recovered, something Elena's mother recognizes instantly. There's no dramatic announcement, just a quiet confirmation delivered in a private room, a truth that lands like a physical blow. Elena Morales has been found. Not whole, not preserved, but present. The case shifts again from disappearance to homicide, from mystery to reckoning. Charges are discussed, strategies recalculated. The question is no longer whether something happened, but how far up it goes. Who ordered it? Who facilitated it? Who looked away remembering that forgetting is easier? The city holds its breath as the ground gives up what it was forced to keep. And somewhere behind closed doors, someone realizes that the story they buried in 2003 has finally clawed its way back to the surface, and that no amount of money or time can push it down again. Because cold cases don't stay cold forever. They wait. The confirmation doesn't arrive with ceremony. It arrives with paperwork, signatures pressed hard into forms, a forensic report read aloud in a room where no one sits comfortably. Elena Morales is no longer missing. She is no longer a possibility. She is evidence. The word feels brutal, transactional, and everyone involved knows it, but the machinery of justice doesn't run on gentler language. It runs on certainty, and certainty has finally entered the case. The excavation site becomes a perimeter overnight. Yellow tape flaps in the wind, like a warning the city refuses to read. Workers who were pouring foundations days earlier now stand aside as technicians document soil composition and bone fragments with clinical care. Every movement is deliberate, because mistakes at this stage don't just compromise evidence, they rewrite history. The ground gives up what it's been holding slowly, reluctantly, as if even the earth understands the weight of what it remembers. Forensics confirm trauma consistent with blunt force, not clean, not efficient, the kind of violence that suggests escalation rather than planning. The absence of restraint marks complicates the narrative, introduces chaos into what was supposed to be controlled. This wasn't a professional execution. It was a situation that slipped. That detail ripples outward, reshaping assumptions, sharpening blame. Someone lost control that night, and someone else decided to clean up afterward. Elena's mother identifies the jewelry without hesitation, her hands steady in a way that feels almost supernatural. She doesn't cry. She thanks the detective for telling her the truth. Later, alone, she will collapse into grief that has been waiting 20 years for permission. But in that room, she is composed, resolute, and terrifyingly clear. She asks one question and only one. Who did this? No one answers yet. Not because they don't have suspicions, but because suspicions aren't enough anymore. The task force pivots hard. What was once a cold case review becomes an active homicide investigation with political consequences. Subpoenas accelerate. Phones that were silent begin ringing again, this time from people who want to be on the record before someone else puts them there. Cooperation blooms suddenly, suspiciously, like flowers after a fire. Marcus Reed is informed of the discovery in a small interview room with no windows. He listens without interruption, his face blank, and when the detective finishes, Marcus nods slowly, as if confirming something he already knew but had been afraid to say out loud. He whispers that he's sorry, not to the police, not to the process, but to Elena, to the idea of her as a person rather than a problem. It doesn't absolve him. It doesn't change what he did. But it lands differently now that her absence has a physical shape. His attorney pushes for a deal. Cooperation in exchange for reduced charges. The prosecutors listen, not because they trust Marcus, but because they understand leverage when they see it. Marcus becomes a bridge, fragile and compromised, but still standing, between what happened and who ordered it. He provides names he once avoided, meetings he once minimized, a clearer picture of the chain that moved Elena from her apartment to the ground that hid her. The man in the expensive coat becomes less abstract. His schedule in early 2003 is reconstructed down to the hour. Fundraisers, closed-door meetings, a charity dinner he left early on Valentine's Day, a phone call logged at 2:09 a.m. to a number that no longer exists, placed from a burner phone purchased days earlier and discarded days later. Coincidences pile up until the word loses meaning. He is invited in for an interview, not summoned, invited. The language is deliberate, respectful, designed to keep him talking. He arrives with counsel, impeccably dressed, controlled, projecting the calm of someone who believes systems exist to protect him. He expresses shock at the discovery, sorrow for the family, outrage at any suggestion of involvement. His lawyer does most of the talking. The detectives listen, ask narrow questions, let silence stretch. Silence is where cracks form. They show him the memo referencing a Valentine's issue. He says he doesn't recall it. They mention the shell company. He says his firm advised many entities. They mention the driver, the red glove, the radar scan. He says speculation isn't evidence. He is technically correct, and yet his voice tightens when they mention the phrase Marcus remembered, the words, "It's handled." He denies ever using it, but denial doesn't erase recognition, and recognition is something experienced investigators can smell. Outside the room, the city reacts to the discovery with a mix of outrage and exhaustion. Candlelight vigils return, larger now, less hopeful, more demanding. Protest signs shift from "Find Elena" to "Who covered up?" The narrative evolves, and with it, the risk. This is no longer just about a dead woman. It's about trust, about power, about how many times this has happened without anyone noticing. Internal Affairs opens a parallel inquiry, quietly at first, then with growing visibility. Old decisions are re-examined. Reports from 2003 are scrutinized for omissions that no longer feel accidental. A detective who worked the original case admits corners were cut under pressure, that leads pointing upward were discouraged without explanation. He doesn't say who applied the pressure. He doesn't have to. The driver's family cooperates fully now, grief untethered from denial. They turn over old belongings, including a pair of gloves found in a storage box, one red, one missing its mate. The leather matches, the stitching matches. The lab confirms what everyone already knows. The glove from Elena's apartment belonged to the driver, a man who moved bodies and money in silence for people who never got their hands dirty. The driver is dead, but death doesn't end responsibility, it redistributes it. Who paid him? Who directed him? Who decided Elena couldn't be allowed to exist as a problem? The answers gather around the same few names, the same nexus of influence, the same social circles where favors were currency and consequences negotiable. Marcus provides one final detail that shifts the balance. He recalls seeing Elena alive when she was moved, disoriented but breathing, asking where she was being taken. He remembers the man in the coat telling her she just needed to cooperate, that everything would be fine. The lie sits heavy in the room. It reframes the violence not as a sudden act, but as a prolonged betrayal. Prosecutors begin drafting charges that reflect that complexity. Kidnapping, conspiracy, homicide. The legal language struggles to contain the moral weight, but it tries. Warrants are prepared, then delayed, then revised again as new information pours in faster than it can be processed. This isn't a single arrest. It's a collapse. The man in the expensive coat senses the shift. His public appearances stop entirely. His crisis firm pivots from containment to defense. Allies distance themselves, issuing statements about integrity and transparency that feel rehearsed. He remains free, for now, but freedom has narrowed around him, defined by cameras and speculation and the slow realization that the past has finally caught his scent. Elena's mother requests to attend the next court hearing, even if no charges are filed yet. She wants to sit in the room where decisions are made, to look at the people who will decide how much her daughter's life was worth in legal terms. The prosecutors agree. They understand symbolism when they see it. As Part 6 draws toward its end, the Chicago 2003 cold case stands transformed. It is no longer a question mark. It is a wound with edges, a narrative with names, a tragedy with fingerprints. The city feels exposed, its polished surfaces scraped away to reveal the compromises beneath. And somewhere behind layers of lawyers and reputation, the man who believed this was handled begins to understand that nothing truly is. Because once the ground gives up its secrets, it never takes them back. The first arrest doesn't come with flashing lights or a dramatic chase. It comes quietly, in the early hours of a gray Chicago morning, when the city is half awake and half forgetful. A man answers his door in slippers, confusion flickering across his face before calculation takes over. He is not the man in the expensive coat. He is something else, a facilitator, a bridge, the kind of person who believes proximity to power is protection. The cuffs close around his wrists with a sound that feels louder than it should. And in that moment, the chain finally breaks its first visible link. The news detonates by noon. Not the arrest itself, but what it implies. Prosecutors confirm the charge: conspiracy to commit kidnapping resulting in death. The language is careful, precise, devastating. It reframes the entire story in a single line. transforming whispers into accusation, suspicion into structure. Commentators scramble to explain it. The public scrambles to understand it. And the people who have lived comfortably in the margins of this case for 2 decades feel something they haven't felt in a long time. Exposure. The facilitator doesn't last long in interrogation. He arrives confident, leaves quieter. Presented with timelines, financial transfers, witness statements, and the unignorable presence of Elena Morales' name printed across every document, he begins to talk, not out of remorse, but out of instinct. Survival has always been his skill. He confirms what detectives already know and adds what they don't, filling in gaps that have frustrated the case for weeks. He describes meetings held in offices with soundproofing disguised as decor. He describes the way decisions were framed as risk management, as damage control, as necessary unpleasantness in service of something larger. He confirms the existence of the man in the expensive coat not as a rumor or a shadow, but as a decision-maker, someone who didn't issue direct orders so much as articulate desired outcomes. Elena Morales, he says, was a variable that needed to be removed from an equation. The words hit hard, even for people trained to hear them. Reduced to a variable. Removed. The facilitator admits he handled logistics after the fact, smoothing paperwork, redirecting attention, ensuring that questions died in inboxes instead of hallways. He insists he never touched Elena, never saw her alive or dead. He insists he didn't know it would go that far. The prosecutor lets him finish, then asks a single question. Did you know she didn't come home? The facilitator looks down. That's enough. With that statement, the case accelerates again. Charges expand. Warrants stack. The man in the expensive coat is no longer insulated by abstraction. His name appears, not yet in headlines, but in court filings, redacted but unmistakable to anyone who knows how to read between black bars. His attorneys move fast, filing motions, challenging jurisdiction, attacking credibility. The language of defense is aggressive now, no longer dismissive. They know the terrain has shifted. Marcus Reed is brought back into the picture with new urgency. His cooperation agreement tightens, his statements recorded with forensic care. He listens as detectives outline what the facilitator said, and for the first time since this began, Marcus looks genuinely surprised. Not at the facts, but at how openly they're being discussed. He says he never thought it would get this far. He says he assumed the truth would always stop just short of the people who mattered. The detective across from him doesn't argue. Assumptions like that are the reason cases like this exist. Marcus provides corroboration where he can, names where he dares, details where memory still holds. He places the man in the expensive coat at key intersections, not physically present but undeniably involved, a voice on the phone, a presence in the room even when absent. He talks about the culture that made it possible, the way silence was rewarded, the way everyone learned not to ask questions that could rearrange their lives. The city reacts in uneven waves. Some people are shocked. Some are vindicated. Some are tired. Protests grow louder, less symbolic, more pointed. Names are chanted. Demands sharpen. This isn't just about Elena anymore. It's about every story that ended quietly because it was easier that way. Officials release statements about accountability and transparency, careful not to promise outcomes they can't control. Inside the department, the reckoning deepens. Internal Affairs expands its inquiry, pulling retired officers back into rooms they thought they'd left forever. All notes are compared. Decisions, once explained as judgment calls, are re-examined as potential interference. One former supervisor admits to receiving a call in 2003 advising him to deprioritize Elena's case. He says he didn't question it because questioning had consequences. The admission lands like a confession, even if it isn't legally one. The driver's role becomes clearer in retrospect, his movements reconstructed with grim precision. He wasn't improvising. He was following instructions refined through repetition. Elena was not his first assignment. That realization spreads quietly through the task force, darkening the atmosphere, raising questions no one wants to ask out loud yet. If this machinery existed, how often was it used? The man in the expensive coat releases another statement, this one more forceful, condemning the arrests as overreach, accusing prosecutors of building narratives to satisfy public anger. He denies all involvement categorically. He frames himself as a victim of circumstance, of association, of ambition. It plays well with some audiences. Others here panic under the polish. A grand jury is convened. Witnesses are called. Testimony stacks up like sediment, layer after layer, each one making it harder for the defense to argue coincidence. The facilitator agrees to plead in exchange for cooperation, his deal contingent on what he can deliver. What he delivers is confirmation. Not yet proof beyond doubt, but confirmation that decisions were made, money was allocated, silence was enforced. Elena's mother attends the proceedings whenever she's allowed. She sits quietly, hands folded, listening to strangers dissect her daughter's last hours with professional detachment. She doesn't interrupt. She doesn't look away. When reporters ask her how she's holding up, she says she's been holding up for 20 years. This part, she says, is just gravity. The media narrative shifts again, less speculative, more prosecutorial. Long-form investigations appear. Old rumors resurface, now supported by documents and testimony. The city's self-image takes a hit. Chicago has always known it carries ghosts, but this one is particularly stubborn, refusing to be contained to the past. As the week closes, a sealed indictment is prepared. Names are finalized. Charges are enumerated. The document sits on a judge's desk overnight, heavy with implication. Somewhere else in the city, the man in the expensive coat packs a bag he insists is for a short trip, checks his phone obsessively, reassures people who don't believe him. He tells himself this is still manageable, that it can still be handled. But the chain is no longer subtle. It's visible now, stretched across courtrooms and headlines and memories that refuse to stay buried. Each link exposed makes the next easier to see. And as the city leans forward, waiting for the moment when power finally meets consequence, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. Elena Morales did not disappear. She was erased. And erasures, once uncovered, tend to leave scars that never fade. The indictment unseals at 9:03 a.m., and within minutes the city knows what it has been holding its breath for. The name is there now, no longer redacted, no longer protected by euphemism or proximity, printed in black ink that feels heavier than paper should allow. The man in the expensive coat is officially accused, not of pulling a trigger or digging a grave, but of orchestrating a removal, of setting in motion a sequence that ended with Elena Morales buried beneath a city that never asked where she went. The charge reads like a ledger entry, cold and legal, but the meaning lands with violence. He is arrested in a downtown office tower, glass and steel reflecting a city that suddenly looks back at him without recognition. There are no cameras inside, but outside the doors reporters gather, microphones raised like weapons, shouting questions that go unanswered. He exits flanked by officers, posture rigid, face carefully neutral, a man performing composure because it's the last thing he still controls. Someone in the crowd yells Elena's name. He doesn't react. Or maybe he does, just not in a way anyone can see. The department releases a statement emphasizing process, restraint, the presumption of innocence. It reads like every other statement issued under pressure, but this one carries an undercurrent that can't be smoothed out. The implication is clear. The system is finally turning on one of its own architects. That realization moves through the city like a weather front, changing conversations, altering expectations. Inside the courthouse, the first hearing is procedural, almost boring in its structure, but nothing about it feels ordinary. The room is full, not just with lawyers and clerks, but with history. Every decision made in that space echoes backward, touching years that were supposed to be settled. The judge reads the charges. The defense objects. The prosecutor responds. It's all familiar, all rote, until Elena's name is spoken aloud in that room for the first time, and something shifts. Even the man accused glances up then, just for a moment, as if reminded that this isn't an abstraction anymore. Marcus Reed watches from protective custody. The proceedings streamed on a small screen bolted to the wall. He doesn't feel relief. He feels exposed. He knows his role isn't over. That cooperation has a price that extends beyond sentencing guidelines. He's already lost friends, already moved his family, already begun living a life measured in exits and contingency plans. He wonders, briefly, if Elena ever imagined how many people would know her name because of what was done to her. The thought makes him nauseous. The facilitator enters a plea days later. Guilty. The word reverberates because it's the first time anyone connected to this case has said it without qualification. He admits to arranging payments, to coordinating logistics, to ensuring silence. He stops short of admitting intent to kill, but the admission is enough to tighten the net. The prosecutor listens, stone-faced, then asks him to describe the meeting where the decision was finalized. The facilitator hesitates, then speaks, and the room leans in without realizing it. He describes a conversation framed as risk assessment, as containment, as an unfortunate necessity. He describes Elena not as a person, but as a liability, someone who knew something she shouldn't, something that threatened to surface at the wrong time. He describes the man in the expensive coat nodding slowly, not angry, not emotional, just decisive. "Make it go away," he said. Not violently, not urgently, just as a matter of fact. The words hang there, unchallenged, because no one in that room believes they were metaphorical. Defense attorneys move aggressively now, filing motions to suppress testimony, to discredit witnesses, to reframe the narrative as opportunism and exaggeration. They attack Marcus Reed's credibility, paint him as a desperate man seeking leniency. They question the facilitator's motives, the reliability of memory stretched across decades. They suggest the investigation itself is tainted by public pressure, by a hunger for accountability that has outpaced evidence. The prosecution counters with patience. They don't argue emotion. They argue structure. They show how independent statements align without coordination, how financial records corroborate timelines, how the recovery site matches routes and resources available to the accused. They remind the court that conspiracies rarely leave single fingerprints. They leave patterns. Outside, the city absorbs the spectacle unevenly. Some neighborhoods erupt in protest, demanding broader investigations, naming other disappearances that feel suddenly relevant. Others retreat into skepticism, warning against overcorrection, against tearing down institutions based on what they see as circumstantial webs. Chicago has always been good at holding conflicting truths at the same time. This case demands it. Elena's mother attends every session she's allowed, her presence quiet but immovable. She doesn't look at the accused. She looks forward, hands folded, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. When reporters ask her what justice looks like, she says justice would have been her daughter coming home. This, she says, is accountability. They are not the same. The trial date is set months out, a strategic delay that allows both sides to prepare and tempers public expectations. In the meantime, the city lives with the knowledge that one of its long-buried stories is now an open wound. More witnesses come forward, emboldened by the arrests, by the sense that silence is no longer mandatory. Some provide useful details. Others bring noise. The task force filters relentlessly, aware that dilution is as dangerous as inaction. Internal reforms begin quietly. Policies are reviewed. Oversight committees convene. There is talk of independent monitors, of transparency initiatives. It feels reactive, but also necessary. Institutions do not survive revelations like this unchanged. They adapt or they fracture. Marcus Reed testifies before the grand jury again, this time with more clarity and less fear. He describes the night in 2003 one final time, the way Elena's confusion cut through the cold, the way the man's voice remained calm even as the situation slipped. He admits his complicity without excuse. He doesn't ask for forgiveness. He says he understands if he never receives it. The man in the expensive coat remains silent publicly, his statements now filtered entirely through counsel. In private, according to sources, he is furious, not at the accusation, but at what he sees as betrayal. People were supposed to stay quiet. Systems were supposed to hold. He underestimated time. He underestimated guilt. He underestimated the way one loose thread can unravel an entire design. As the weeks pass, the case becomes a reference point, shorthand for a larger conversation about power and consequence. Another Elena. People say when discussing unexplained disappearances, her name becomes a symbol, not because she sought it, but because the city needs something to anchor its reckoning. Symbols are easier to hold than grief. And yet, beneath the noise, beneath the legal maneuvering and public debate, there's a quieter transformation taking place. The story is no longer just about what happened to Elena Morales. It is about how many people knew, how many chose convenience over courage, how many times the phrase "it's handled" was allowed to stand in for humanity. As Part 8 closes, the case stands fully in the light, stripped of ambiguity, but not of complexity. The machinery that erased Elena has been exposed, gear by gear, and now it grinds against itself, loud and undeniable. The city watches, waits, argues, mourns. And somewhere in that noise, Elena's absence finally has weight, finally demands something back from the place that once swallowed it whole. The trial is coming, and with it, the truth will have to finish note. The trial begins without spectacle, which somehow makes it worse. No dramatic entrances, no shouted confessions, just a steady procession of people filing into a courtroom that feels too small to contain what's about to be examined. Wood benches creak, papers shuffle, the judge takes the bench, and with that, the city is forced to listen to itself. The prosecution opens with restraint, almost understatement, as if aware that excess would cheapen what they're about to reveal. They don't describe Elena Morales as a symbol or a headline. They describe her as a routine, a commute, a life shaped by habit and expectation. They talk about the apartment, the phone call, the red glove. They let the jury feel the normalcy before they introduce the fracture, because fractures are only shocking when you understand what was whole. The defense follows with a different tone, calm and surgical. They frame the case as a tragedy distorted by time, by unreliable memories, by the modern impulse to retrofit intent onto old mistakes. They remind the jury that no one saw the accused strike Elena, that no recording captures an order, that the driver is dead and the witness is compromised. They repeat one word again and again, like a mantra meant to ward off doubt. Circumstantial. The first witness is a forensic analyst, precise and clinical, explaining soil composition and bone degradation to a room that doesn't really want to hear it, but knows it must. Charts appear, timeline to line. The remains recovered from the industrial site tell a story of movement, of concealment, of haste disguised as planning. The analyst avoids speculation. Facts are enough. Then Marcus Reed takes the stand. He looks smaller than he did in interrogation footage, diminished by the gravity of being watched by strangers who now hold his future in their hands. He swears to tell the truth, voice steady enough to pass, and begins where he always begins, on the sidewalk across from Elena's building, under a streetlight that barely worked. He describes the cold, the waiting, the man in the expensive coat arriving without urgency. He describes the door closing, the voices rising, the silence afterward. The defense attacks immediately, probing inconsistencies, highlighting deals, suggesting motive. Marcus doesn't resist. He agrees he's guilty. He agrees he benefited. He agrees he waited too long. The honesty disarms some jurors and unsettles others. When asked why he's speaking now, he answers simply that Elena didn't get to choose silence, so he shouldn't either. The facilitator follows, his testimony smoother, more practiced. He speaks the language of offices and contracts, translating violence into euphemism the way he's always done. But under cross-examination, that language collapses. When asked to repeat the words used in the meeting where the decision was made, he hesitates, then repeats them verbatim. Make it go away. The prosecutor doesn't embellish. He lets the words sit. Elena's mother is not called as a witness. The prosecution doesn't need her testimony to prove the case, and they won't ask her to relive what the evidence already shows. But her presence is felt anyway, a steady weight in the front row. When photographs are shown, she closes her eyes. When timelines are discussed, she watches the clock. She has waited long enough to know that time doesn't move the same way for everyone. The man in the expensive coat does not testify. His attorneys advise against it, citing strategy, citing risk. He sits still throughout the proceedings, expression carefully neutral, reacting only when his name is spoken in ways that can't be ignored. The jury studies him the way juries always do, searching for meaning in posture and breath, knowing they shouldn't, knowing they will anyway. Expert witnesses explain conspiracy dynamics, how power insulates itself through layers, how decisions can be made without direct commands, how plausible deniability is often the point. The defense objects. The judge allows it. The courtroom absorbs a lesson in how systems protect themselves, and the lesson feels uncomfortably familiar. As days pass, the narrative tightens. The block call, the burner phone, the financial transfers, the driver's route. Each piece alone might wobble. Together, they form a structure that's hard to dismiss. The defense pivots, suggesting overreach, suggesting that prosecutors are punishing success, ambition, proximity. They imply this is a referendum on power itself. Some jurors shift uncomfortably. Others lean in. The city watches in fragments, snippets on lunch breaks, headlines scrolling across phones, conversations half finished on trains. Opinion fractures along predictable lines. Some see justice finally catching up. Others see a dangerous precedent. The case becomes a mirror, reflecting whatever the viewer brings to it. Closing arguments arrive heavy with implication. The prosecution speaks of choice, of moments where the accused could have stopped what was unfolding and didn't. They remind the jury that Elena Morales did not vanish into abstraction. She was taken. She was moved. She was buried. They ask the jury to consider not just what was done, but what was allowed. The defense counters with caution, urging jurors not to confuse narrative coherence with proof, not to let outrage substitute for certainty. They warn against condemning a man based on the words of criminals seeking leniency. They ask whether doubt remains. They insist it must. The jury deliberates for days. Inside the room, voices rise and fall. Evidence is re-examined, credibility debated. Some jurors fixate on the absence of a direct order. Others focus on the patterns that don't require one. They argue about responsibility, about intent, about whether power carries obligation even when it hides behind intermediaries. The conversation is tense, raw, human. Outside, Elena's mother waits. She doesn't speculate. She doesn't pray aloud. She watches the doors the way she once watched her phone, braced for whatever comes next. The verdict arrives on a Thursday afternoon, unannounced until it's suddenly everything. The courtroom fills. The defendant stands. The jury foreperson's voice is steady, practiced, as if steadiness can blunt the impact of the words that follow. Guilty. Not on every count. Not without dissent. But enough. The room exhales in fragments. Some people cry. Some nod. Some stare straight ahead as if movement might break something fragile inside them. The man in the expensive coat closes his eyes, just for a second, and when he opens them again, something fundamental has shifted. The illusion of insulation is gone. Sentencing is scheduled for later. Appeals are promised. Statements are released. The machinery continues to turn. But the moment has already passed. The city has heard what it needed to hear. Elena Morales did not disappear into nothing. She disappeared into silence. And silence, when broken, has consequences. As Part 9 closes, the case stands no longer as a question, but as a reckoning partially realized, imperfect and incomplete, but undeniable. Justice, such as it is, has spoken in a voice shaped by compromise and time. And in Chicago, a cold case that waited 20 years has finally forced the city to say her name out loud, not as a mystery, not as a rumor, but as a truth that refuses to be softened. The story is not over, but it has crossed a line from shadow into history. Sentencing day arrives under a gray Chicago sky that feels deliberately indifferent, the kind of weather that refuses symbolism even as the city tries to assign it. Inside the courthouse, the air is heavier than it was during the trial, weighted not by uncertainty, but by finality. The verdict settled the question of guilt, but punishment is a different argument entirely, one that forces the system to articulate what a life, a silence, and 20 years of absence are worth in years and numbers. The prosecution speaks first, methodical and unsparing. They do not raise their voice. They do not dramatize. They recite consequences the way accountants recite losses, detailing the ripple effects that followed Elena Morales' disappearance. Careers redirected, investigations abandoned, a mother aging in place, frozen in a posture of waiting. They argue that power used to erase accountability is more dangerous than violence committed in desperation, because it teaches others that removal is an option. They ask the court to impose a sentence that acknowledges not only what was done, but what it enabled. The defense responds with a portrait of complexity. They speak of charitable donations, of public service, of a man who never held a weapon, never touched the body, never spoke the words aloud. They argue that he is being punished for proximity, for influence, for failing to stop something he did not directly command. They warn that a severe sentence will discourage cooperation in future cases, that it will collapse the distinction between action and implication. They ask for mercy framed as restraint. The man in the expensive coat is offered the chance to speak. He stands slowly, adjusting his jacket out of habit, muscle memory overriding the gravity of the moment. His voice, when it comes, is controlled but uneven at the edges. He does not confess beyond what the verdict requires. He does not apologize in the way apologies are expected to sound. Instead, he speaks about regret in abstract terms, about consequences he never anticipated, about how things got out of hand. He avoids Elena's name until the very end, when he says it once, quietly, as if testing whether it still carries weight. The judge listens without interruption. Elena's mother is given the floor next. She does not bring notes. She does not look at the defendant. She speaks to the room, not to him. She describes the moment she realized waiting had become a lifestyle. She describes birthdays marked by absence, holidays reshaped around a chair no one sits in. She does not ask for vengeance. She asks for acknowledgement. She asks the court to recognize that silence can be violent too. When she finishes, the room is so quiet it feels suspended. The sentence is pronounced with care, every word measured. Decades, not a lifetime, but close enough to feel intentional. The judge explains the reasoning, citing deterrence, responsibility, the corrosive effect of unchecked power. He acknowledges the imperfections of the case, the delays, the compromises, and says they are precisely why the sentence must be firm. When the gavel falls, it does not echo. It simply ends the moment. Outside, reactions fracture instantly. Some call the sentence historic. Others call it insufficient. Editorials appear within hours, parsing implications, debating precedent. Protesters gather again, some demanding further investigations, others warning against what they see as scapegoating. The city does what it always does when confronted with discomfort. It argues loudly, hoping noise will resolve what clarity cannot. Marcus Reed watches the sentencing alone, the broadcast muted, subtitles crawling across the screen. He doesn't feel vindicated. He feels hollowed out. His cooperation agreement will spare him the worst outcomes, but it won't restore what he traded away. He understands now that justice doesn't move forward in a straight line. It circles, revisiting the same points from different angles, never fully closing the distance. The facilitator is sentenced separately, his penalty lighter but still substantial. He accepts it with resignation, the performance of a man who has always known the math and finally sees it balanced. He avoids eye contact with the gallery. He avoids thinking about Elena as a person. Some habits are too ingrained to abandon, even now. In the weeks that follow, the case continues to unfold in quieter ways. Appeals are filed, as promised. Motions argue procedural errors, evidentiary overreach. Legal analysts debate likelihoods. The process grinds on, slower now, but no less consequential. The verdict stands while it's tested, like a structure exposed to weather, waiting to see what holds. More importantly, other doors begin to open. A cold case unit receives renewed funding. Anonymous tips referencing long-forgotten disappearances begin to arrive. Names surface in conversations that once ended abruptly. The Elena Morales case becomes a reference point not because it is unique, but because it proved that time does not guarantee safety. That realization unsettles people who have relied on it. Families of other missing persons reach out to Elena's mother. Some thank her. Some ask how she endured. She has no useful answer. Endurance, she has learned, is not a choice but a consequence. You keep breathing because the alternative is unacceptable. She visits Elena's grave now, something she avoided for years because it felt like surrender. The marker is simple. The dates still look wrong. The city begins to tell the story in fragments. Podcasts dissect the investigation. Documentaries reconstruct timelines with ominous music. Elena's name is spoken by people who never knew her, sometimes with reverence, sometimes with carelessness. The transformation from person to narrative is uncomfortable, but unavoidable. Stories have gravity. They pull attention whether they deserve it or not. Inside the institutions implicated by the case, change arrives unevenly. Some reforms are substantive. Others are cosmetic. Committees issue reports heavy with language and light on accountability. Whistleblower protections are expanded on paper. Training modules are updated. Whether any of it would have saved Elena is impossible to know, and the question itself becomes a quiet indictment. The man in the expensive coat begins his sentence in a facility far from downtown offices and private elevators. His days lose their structure, replaced by routines he does not control. For the first time, his name carries no leverage. Letters arrive from supporters and detractors alike. He reads none of them. He spends time thinking about contingency plans that no longer apply, about networks that dissolve the moment they were tested. He learns, slowly, that insulation works only until it doesn't. At night, the city continues as if nothing fundamental has changed. Trains run, bars fill, lights flicker on and off in apartment windows. But beneath that continuity is a subtle shift, a recalibration of what people believe is possible. The idea that a disappearance can remain unresolved forever has been weakened. Not destroyed, just cracked. Elena Morales is no longer a question mark. She is a conclusion reached too late to matter to her, but not too late to matter to others. That distinction haunts the case, a reminder that justice is often retrospective, offering recognition instead of rescue. The system did not save her. It named what was done to her. The difference is significant, but insufficient. As Part 10 closes, the story enters its long aftermath, the phase where consequences stretch beyond headlines and courtrooms into habits and assumptions. The cold case is officially closed, stamped and archived, but its residue lingers, influencing decisions that will never reference it directly. A hesitation here, a question asked there, a silence broken sooner than it once would have been. The machinery that once erased Elena has been forced to reveal itself, and in doing so, it has lost some of its power. Not all, enough to matter. The city exhales again, unsure whether this breath is relief or preparation, because even solved cases leave shadows. And shadows have a way of reminding us that endings are rarely clean and closure is never complete. Years pass the way they always do after a reckoning, unevenly, selectively, clinging to some details while erasing others. The Chicago 2003 cold case is no longer breaking news. It has settled into archives, citations, footnotes in legal journals, timestamps and documentaries that autoplay late at night. But resolution does not mean rest. It means the story changes shape, trading urgency for persistence, becoming something that lives in the background instead of the spotlight. The courthouse clears. The protests thin. The cameras move on. What remains is quieter and harder to measure. Elena Morales' name still appears on plaques and grant proposals, attached to reforms and task forces that promise vigilance. Her case becomes an example used in training sessions, a cautionary tale told to new investigators about delays, about deference, about what happens when assumptions replace curiosity. The slides are clinical, bullet points, timelines, but sometimes a trainee asks a question that breaks the script, something human, something raw, and the room goes silent in a way that feels familiar. What would have happened if someone had spoken sooner? No one answers, not because the answer is unknown, but because it's unbearable in its simplicity. Elena's mother grows older in a world that finally knows what she always did. She keeps her routines, morning coffee, evening walks. She speaks at events when asked, not as an activist, not as a symbol, but as a witness to time. She tells people that the hardest part was not the waiting itself, but the way the world kept moving as if waiting were optional. She never raises her voice. She doesn't need to. Her certainty fills the space others leave empty. She visits the grave less often now, not because she's forgotten, but because she no longer needs to prove remembrance through repetition. Grief, she has learned, evolves. It doesn't fade. It changes posture. Marcus Reed disappears from public consciousness almost immediately after sentencing. His cooperation is noted, his punishment adjusted, and then he becomes another name sealed in paperwork. He moves through life under restrictions that feel permanent even when they're not. He avoids news coverage. He avoids mirrors on bad days. He knows there are people who will never forgive him, and he has stopped trying to imagine a version of himself who deserves it. Sometimes, in quiet moments, he replays the night in 2003, not as a sequence of actions, but as a series of chances, moments where he could have walked away, spoken up, refused. He doesn't romanticize them. He understands now that courage rarely arrives as a single dramatic choice. It appears as small, inconvenient interruptions. He missed them all. The facilitator fades as well, his sentence absorbed into the machinery he once navigated so easily. He spends his days in structured anonymity, surrounded by men who also believe systems would protect them indefinitely. There are conversations he avoids, questions he no longer answers even to himself. He tells people he's accepted responsibility. What he means is that he's learned how to live with being known for one thing. The man in the expensive coat becomes a case study, his fall cited whenever power and accountability intersect in conversation. His appeals fail slowly, methodically, each rejection reinforcing a reality he once believed negotiable. Inside, time moves differently. Days stretch. Silence deepens. Influence evaporates. He is forced to confront something he spent a lifetime avoiding: irrelevance. He thinks about Elena more than he expected to. Not her face, he never allowed himself to see it clearly, but her impact. The way her absence reconfigured everything he thought was permanent. He understands now that removal is never clean. It leaves residue. It always does. The city absorbs the lesson imperfectly. Some changes stick, others revert. New scandals arise, competing for attention, testing memory. People grow tired of vigilance. They always do. But the Elena Morales case left behind a fracture that never fully seals, a reminder embedded in procedure and hesitation. Investigators pause longer before dismissing anomalies. Journalists push harder on old timelines. Families of the missing are met with slightly less skepticism, slightly more patience. It is not enough. It is something. Late at night, reruns of documentaries still air, their narration heavy with foreboding, their conclusions framed as triumphs. They end with phrases like "justice served" and "closure achieved." Viewers fall asleep to those words, comforted by the illusion that endings can be definitive. But the truth is less accommodating. Justice arrived for Elena Morales long after it could help her. Closure arrived only in fragments. The cold case was solved, but the conditions that allowed it to remain cold for so long did not disappear with the verdict. They receded. They adapted. They learned. and so did everyone else. In classrooms, law students debate the case, arguing culpability thresholds, conspiracy doctrine, moral responsibility. In living rooms, families discuss it more quietly, as a warning, as a reminder that silence can masquerade as safety until it doesn't. In police stations, the file remains accessible, no longer active but never fully closed, its presence a quiet rebuke. Elena's name continues to surface in unexpected places. A scholarship, a mural, a line in a speech about accountability. Each appearance risks dilution, but also preservation. Memory is a negotiation. It survives by being repeated, even imperfectly. On the 20th anniversary of her disappearance, there is no official ceremony. Just a few people gathered near the river, watching the water move past the point where so many things vanished unnoticed. Someone reads her name aloud. Someone else releases a single flower. It drifts for a moment, then disappears beneath the surface, carried forward by a current that does not pause for significance. That, more than anything, feels right. Because the story of Elena Morales was never meant to be tidy. It was meant to be unsettling. It was meant to linger. It was meant to remind a city, and anyone listening, that unanswered questions do not expire on a schedule, and that time does not absolve what silence protects. The Chicago 2003 cold case is officially closed, but its echo is not. It lives in the hesitation before a file is shelved, in the decision to ask one more question, in the refusal to accept, make it go away as an answer. And somewhere in that echo, Elena's absence finally becomes what it should have been all along. Not a void, not a rumor, not a footnote, but a presence strong enough to demand reckoning, even years later, even after the headlines fade. The city continues. The story settles. But the silence no longer wins. Time does not stop moving just because a story has been told. It keeps going, indifferent